Hey, this is Jody with weldingtipsandtricks.com. I've got one drawer in my toolbox. It's got a whole bunch of odds and ends copper pieces like this. I save them all because they come in handy, and I'll show you why in just a few seconds in this video. We're going to do edge welds. An edge joint is like this, where two pieces are sandwiched together and the weld is just right down the edge joining them together, but that's pretty uncommon. What's more common is just a buildup of weld on an edge of a piece of metal to compensate for some worn area or something dinged or whatever. And it's a lot easier to do with a piece of copper clamped to the back of it. That's why I say save all your copper, and that's why I showed you my copper a minute ago. This is about a 1/2 inch piece of copper. I use it for a drift a lot of times, but also use it a lot to weld against. So I've got it clamped back right against this 11 gauge piece of metal here, and I'm MIG welding just to show you how easy it is to do MIG weld buildup on edge welds like this with copper backing, because it traps the shielding gas. It kind of provides like almost a mold to cast the metal. It'll only go so far. If you want, you can actually clamp a piece of shim on the back side to let the metal droop over a little bit if you need it to build up and sink down a little bit further. But just to show you, I just clamped it right straight there. Now this would be a kind of a typical, some type of a wear pattern on a blade or something that needed to be built up. I don't know. I'm just kind of making a little mock-up here, showing you how you can line the copper block up to kind of give you a guide as far as how much weld metal you want on there. So I've got the edge of that copper. When I get out to the edge, I know I'll have about enough. So I'm gonna run a bunch of MIG passes on this, and I'm gonna make a turn here when I get to that little intersection. And it's going to take 4 or 5 passes here, but it's pretty easy. It's really hard to screw up, because the metal will not melt the copper. Even though copper has a lower melting point than steel, it's so thermally conductive that it just draws the heat right away. And unless you just get nuts and we're doing something like spray transfer or something with tremendous heat, you won't melt that copper. It'll just provide a backing to trap the argon and argon mix CO2 gas, whatever you're using, get good shielding, and it'll mold the metal for you. There's the first pass. We'll come back over with a second one real quick here. There we go. Really, again, it's kind of hard to mess up. You just want to go slow enough, because also I've got the wire feed cranked up pretty high here, because what I'm trying to do is build up. So I want to put down a lot of metal, but just go slow enough to let it overlap each previous bead by about half, so you won't have any low valleys and whatnot, so that when you grind or machine it off, it'll be sound metal. It'll clean up good. And just come out to the edge far enough. Each time you start and you stop, just come out to the edge far enough to make sure it builds up enough. Like I said, I think this took maybe 5, maybe even 6 passes, I don't know. But the copper draws the heat out, so you don't really have to wait a very long time. Now what you don't want to do is you don't ever want to touch that copper when you get done doing something like this, because man, it holds the heat. But it draws the heat out of the steel, so the heat only stays red hot for just a few seconds, and you can just go right back in there, go right back to the well, and without hardly even, just about enough time to snip your wire, you can get right back in there and weld. I'm going to show you a practical application for doing build-up like this in just a minute. I'm trying to do that in most of my videos. Go to some effort to make things more interesting instead of just do a joint, 2 pieces of metal or whatever. And this is pretty good as far as I cut that little area out to build up. But I've got a tiller tine that I'm going to show you in just a minute. Now, a lot of people will build up tiller tines. I personally probably wouldn't do that. I value my time a little bit more than that. But a lot of people, they got a MIG welder. They got some worn out tiller tines. They don't want to pony up $100 or $200 for a set. So they'll do a little weld buildup. This is a good way to do it. If you got some scrap copper around, it really helps the process. So that's that. You see, I came out almost to the edge of that copper. Probably could use about one more bead if I wanted it to machine off and be the absolute same dimension. But you see how it pulls loose from the copper just like that? It looks a little funny on the back side where it went up against the copper, but it grinds off clean. Now here's a tiller tine. Now, what I'm going to do is, this thing was almost brand new. I bought it off of eBay, so I'm going to have to grind. It seems kind of wasteful, but $10 makes the video more interesting. I'm going to have to grind a little area off. And I did notice a difference. It's time to talk about spark testing metal. I ground that off, and you see the sparks, and now I grind this mild steel, and you look at the sparks. And I'll show you a comparison here in just a second. There's the tiller tine sparks, which is probably, I'm going to guess it's going to be like a 1045 kind of medium carbon steel, and there's the mild steel. So big difference in the sparks. There's a whole science behind that. It's spark testing metal to see what it is. But high carbon steels or manganese steels, this might be a high manganese steel for wear properties, give off a different spark pattern than mild steel. And it's worth looking up. You can find a whole spark chart on Wikipedia and lots of other places. I went ahead and put the first bead, I went ahead and put it nice and slow and wide to give myself a nice base to build onto. And then the second bead, again, that copper is clamped on here. I'm just doing a little bit of a zigzag pattern because I don't want any low places, and I can go nice and slow. It'll all grind off just fine, but I don't want a valley to have a groove when I'm done that didn't grind off clean. And then I'll speed this last bead up. And so I kind of tapered them a little bit to where I won't have so much grinding to do. And then I ground them off, dressed them down, which is kind of what you do. Now this will not be near as hard as the tiller tine was originally. It's mild steel, and I'm putting mild steel on probably a medium to high carbon steel tiller tine there. But it is something that some people do sometimes. Well, I know that edge welds aren't all that exciting, so I got a little joke for you. Help you remember this video, make it a little bit more memorable. It's going to take 1 minute. You can hang with me 1 minute, you might get a chuckle. All right, this salesman from New York City goes down south to go duck hunting on his company's hunting property. So he's waiting all morning. He's cold, he's wet, he's miserable. He sees one lone duck flying over. He wants to bring a duck back home. So he shoots, he wings it. It comes flopping down. He runs through the swamp, splashing through the water, hops a barbed wire fence, sees the duck flopping around, gets ready to grab the duck by the neck. Here's a shotgun, pump shotgun cock. He looks up, there's a farmer. He says, "What are you doing, boy?" He says, "I shot this duck. I'm going to get this duck. I'm going to bring it home." Farmer says, "No, not your duck." "Oh yeah, I shot the duck. It's my duck, Gomer." I can tell you're not from around here. We got a way of settling little disputes like this. We call it farmers' combat. What we do is we square off like grown men. We kick each other in the groin. Winner gets the duck. He hauls off. He kicks the old boy as hard as he could. Guy doubles over, throws up, soils his pants, rolls around in the mud, finally regains his composure and gets up. He squares off for his turn. Farmer says, keep the duck. Farmers' combat. You're welcome.